Yo, this is Master Plan, and you're listening to
This Filipino American Life.
Yes, sir. Nice.
My secret, just do something that ain't nobody ever done before, but make it sound like something that's always been there forever.
Hello, welcome to This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States at iba pa. My name is Joe Bernardo, and I'm joined by my fellow hosts,
Ryan Carpio,
Elaine DeLawless,
and
Mike. So I was hoping you wouldn't do that this time. I had this feeling like you forgot about it,
Nope.
and then we wouldn't do. Okay,
I don't think that's going to happen.
Nope, it's a bit. It's a part of the show.
great.
Deal with it.
So today we have, who is our TFAL of the episode, Elaine?
Our TFAL of the episode is Ryan's really good friend, Charisse Datu.
Charisse. Thank you,
Charisse.
Oh my
Charisse.
gosh.
No idea.
Ryan doesn't know who you are.
really?
No, we talked about it earlier. She goes, Charisse. I'm like, I'm going to say she's my friend.
Yeah.
Well, we're friends now, Charisse. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your support of the podcast. We
Charisse.
appreciate you.
I enjoy your vinegar.
Datu
Puti.
Oh God, I was like, what?
Actually, no, we should boycott
No, we can't.
it. Yeah, we have to
NutriAsia, boycott it. We do not enjoy your vinegar.
Wait, why?
NutriAsia, the boycott of the
Yeah.
workers.
So you have to boycott Silver Swan,
Yeah.
Datu Puti,
Datu Puti.
Mang Tomas.
What? Even
Yes.
Mang Tomas?
Yeah. Sad trombone for that because, we all love all those things. But
yeah.
no.
But if
terrible.
anybody has an update, because I'm actually not sure where they are in the kind of negotiations or in that kind of controversy. So anybody can let us know what the latest is.
Yeah, give us the
That'd
juice.
be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But today we are going to explore creative writing.
Creative what?
Creative writing.
Writing.
Yes.
Oh, not writing. Writing.
Right
Right on. I don't
Yes.
know. I'm just...
Okay.
So get out your chat books, get out your pen and paper.
Let me get my composition notebook out.
Yes.
And my moleskin.
Moleskin. That's what I was trying to think of the word.
No, OGs use the 5-star notebooks.
No.
No, OGs use the notepad you get from realtors with a phone number.
Sometimes it's a Post-it.
It has a magnet for your refrigerator.
So, how much writing do you all do?
Well, I write every day. They're called emails and text messages.
Are you creative in it?
And
I mean, I
tweets
try.
and tweets, Facebook posts.
I try to be like a lot of exclamation points and emojis, all those things.
Well, specifically like writing, I guess creatively for yourself or for an audience.
I always go through phases. So I actually had it like in 2018. My goal is to write like a manuscript for a memoir, and I had it outlined. Yeah, I have not touched it in about 5 months. So it's there.
Yeah.
It was inspired by like another book I read that used pop culture as a point of reference for their memoir and their experience with like trauma. And I was like, oh, I could do that too. And I wrote a whole outline talking about like certain pop culture moments in my life and how I wanted to write about it. And yeah, life happens.
What book was that?
What book was it? Hold on. I don't remember. You guys talk amongst
So
yourselves.
inspirational, you don't remember the name of it.
Hey, in 2018, I've read 119 books. Forgive me. It's a lot of books.
Wow. How about you, Mike?
I don't write.
You don't write anymore?
Not really. I mean, I did for a short clip, and then I don't know. I think it just it's one of those things. Like if I have the time for it and the mind for it, like I'll do it. And I used to actually be into journalism, actually more in like nonfiction and like anything. But I think at a certain point, I just felt like I was forcing it, so I just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to that point where you feel like you're making yourself do some things because you're supposed to do it for some reason or another, and you kind of lose like the interest in it, really, like then why bother? So there's a lot of things in my life that are like that. If you come to know me, there's a lot of little hobbies and creative things I've done over the years that I kind of just don't do anymore.
I kind of want to know more about Mike.
We'll figure that
Maybe
out
in the
soon enough.
future.
Maybe in the future.
Maybe in a future episode. Yeah.
While Mike was talking, I looked it up, and the book is called "You Play the Girl" on Playboy Bunnies, Stepford Wives, Train Wrecks, and Other Mixed Messages by Karina Chocano.
There you go.
So I read that, got inspired, and now I have a outline that hasn't been touched in 5 months.
Wow, Playboy, huh?
Yeah, I was totally gonna write about that.
Joe heard blah 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 Playboy blah blah blah. blah.
I'm gonna creatively write about how Playboy impacts culture.
Right, guy?
I read it for the stories. So
Why is it in the bathroom?
hey, you have magazines in your bathroom. There's stories there. I used to write back in the day like Zanga, and I used to journal actually. I used to journal a lot more. Maybe
What was your Zanga name?
so. One was called.
Ryan's Secret Garden.
There is one called Ryan's Secret Garden, but that was my communal one. But mine was called the King of Mediocrity. Was my title. It was like
Wow,
very
so like late 90s emo.
yeah. It was very emo.
That sounds like a band.
It was very emo. My name is supposed to be a derivative of the word Ray or Rex or King. So I was like, okay. I'm the King of Mediocrity. It's kind of like my. I don't know, it's a little self-deprecating, I think, but I did all these like little journal entries of like just stories I wanted to tell, whether it be like my first Valentine's kiss or my first date, or like even I think I did a story about my mom and all that stuff. So
Is it still up?
no, Zanga folded,
died.
man.
No, but I thought you could like look up the
No,
archives, like
you
the
can't.
Internet Archive Wayback Machine.
Nope.
But I do have a Word doc
With all of them?
of like maybe 300 pages of like random entries that included Zanga, like a journal entry that I didn't write down on a notebook from the Philippines.
We need
trip.
to publish that.
Oh,
Let
man.
us.
It's just like random.
We'll create this press. It'll be called This Filipino American Life Press. And then we'll put out an ebook of Ryan's stories.
And then, like in middle school, I used to journal. Our teacher, our 8th grade teacher, kind of forced us to write,
Reflect.
and I would journal about Tiffany Amber Thiessen.
Because of course.
Because of course. Just saying. Wow. But yeah, but I haven't.
Dear
I still write, but not as much.
Dear Kelly Kapowski.
I love you. When will we get married?
Yeah. So now it's more like random whenever I get the urge. Now I save a lot of things on Google Drafts. So I have like a lot of Google Drafts, whether it be about poker or just random stuff that I write.
Dear Kelly Kapowski, I won big today when I played poker.
Will you marry me?
Can we get married now?
How about you, Joe?
I guess I write with a friend. We have a Tumblr.
You guess?
What?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not very
What?
active. It's not as active.
What is this?
So my friend,
Is it secret Tumblr?
yeah.
Okay.
What's a Tumblr? Like a
Tumblr's like the new bloggy blogs.
Well, new like 5
New
years ago.
like 5
new.
years ago, dude. It's really good at reposting. It's mostly for memes.
I didn't even know this.
I don't even know. It just she set it up, so I'll go with it.
TUMBLR.com.
But my friend Marites, shout out to Marites, she's a listener. She and I kind of have this Tumblr where we write about anything and pretty much kind of like our loose academic thoughts about things. So we talk about
Are you guys writing to each other, or are you guys writing about things?
we write about things, but we kind of we bounce off ideas off each other.
Yeah.
So like, for example, if you have like some kind of theory about why Filipinos do this, and then we write to each other and say, "This is my theory,"
Got it.
and then she'll respond to it. And it's not just Filipino things. We
No.
talk about like activism. We talk
I
about
laugh
It's like
because
Edison and Tesla writing to each other.
it just there's a class that we have. It's called RAC. It's called Research Apprenticeship Course, and essentially the course is for groups to get together to bounce off research ideas and feedback.
Yeah.
So I laugh because it sounds like your Tumblr is like an online version. of
Yeah,
RAC.
yeah. She's definitely like my what you call it? What's the person who
Mentor.
not mentor, but like
Muse.
I guess kind of a muse, but she's always giving me good feedback. I don't know if there's like a term for that, but
Peer reviewed.
it's basically somebody I always bounce off ideas with.
She's your contemporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when Ryan and I bounce random ideas, like political ideas with you.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I write. And mostly only about nonfiction. I've never been a fiction person. I don't know why. I just find I already find creativity in the real world, so that's why I am more of a nonfiction person.
I think I derive from reality, and I've dabbled in poetry, if you could call what I wrote poetry back in college.
Someone needs to
I
read
was
some of
very
that on
emo.
this.
I know,
podcast.
man.
Sample.
Oh man,
You have to share.
no, it's okay. It's been a long time, but yeah, I used to write that way, and I used to like be intentional about structure and all that, thinking I was a poet or a writer for that matter, but nothing really came of
I have
it.
a slam right here in the middle of this dining room.
But I like how the mediums have changed, especially in this day and age, right?
Yeah.
Like if we were living 100 years ago or something, we would only be writing novels or only writing in like newspaper pamphlets or something. And but now it's like there's so many avenues to write. There's Tumblr, there is blogs, and
believe it or not,
Twitter
there's
and
texting,
texting.
right? Like you have, I mean,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like there's like an ease to the communication, and what I mean by that is like it's you
Talking about, like, Twitter,
it's
maybe,
there.
or?
You can say, or even Twitter, like a limited amount of words. You sort of have to be creative with. I think they doubled it now, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
The number of characters. But you're right. I think the medium has definitely changed.
Where do you do your best writing?
Bathroom. I'm just kidding.
I totally was in the same bathroom. I'm like on the toilet.
Where, actually, probably I would say, I'm not a desk writer. Like I don't necessarily I know the blogs and everything, but usually that comes from like a notebook. Like I usually write in places where I can just go, oh, I kind of want to sit down and write.
I wish it was consistent about things, but it's not, because sometimes it happens like when I'm on a walk or even when I'm driving, and like it's totally
So
not.
you write when you drive?
Yeah, like it's terrible. I'm not really supposed to, but like
Wait, what? Are you serious?
Yeah, so if I'm driving
Oh, in Google Docs or something?
and I get inspiration,
Yeah.
I'll just open a note up in my phone, and then I make like when I stop, I'll jot it down. Because if I don't, like I think like, oh, I'll keep it, and I'm like, it's immediately gone.
Yeah, you never keep it. It
I
just
never keep
fades
it.
into the ether.
So I open up a note right away.
Wow.
So my phone has like a shit ton of like random things.
So don't drive behind Elaine.
No, don't. I wouldn't.
Or in front, or to
in
the
front,
side.
or just don't drive when I'm on the road.
I do my best writing in a coffee shop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you like the ambient noise or like the
Yeah.
to not be home?
Yeah, not be home. I just feel like when I'm at home, I just want to relax. I don't like working. In a coffee shop, at least I'm, I guess, surrounded by people, even though I'm not interacting with them per se. But at least I'm surrounded by them. I just feel like, I don't know, I guess more inspiration.
You like the co-work space?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. How about you, Mike?
I was going to say at work, but I want to remain employed, so I won't say at work. But basically at work.
On your lunch break at work, there. Done.
Sure. My all-day lunch break.
Do you ever share your writing with anybody or
No.
perform your writing?
Never performed. I mean, back then, I guess Zango was the share, right? Online, some of my friends would comment on it and all that stuff, but I don't think so. I think in general, it's more of like a journal entry for me. Some of them can be really creative and fictional.
For the past 2 years, my friend TK has organized every April. It's write a poem a day, and TK's organized a group of us to write online in a different kind of space. Like 1 year it was in a Facebook group. The following year it was like in a private Google blog thing. So that is like shared amongst the people who are in the group. But in public and reading, I think maybe a year or two ago, I did something for Tuesday night. Oh no, Mike and I We performed at Tuesday night
Damn
this
it.
past season.
Mike's like, I was hoping you'd forget that.
Totally, yeah. And we
was like,
had
is
to
that
like
last
Wait,
year?
something
This
you
year.
guys wrote together?
we had to. So we did a piece each, and then we did something where we wrote together. And I don't recommend it.
Was your
Writing
stage name Malane?
with no, it wasn't. That's a good one, but no.
No, we have a stage name.
What are we?
Starsky
It's
and Hutch?
Bastos and Sago.
Oh, Bastos and Sago. That's right. That was our name.
Our riff off Bill and Sebastian.
Yeah. But we wrote a piece together about historic Filipino town being home.
Nice.
I told a story that was actually involved Ryan.
What?
Yeah. Because my story was how when we came home from the Bay Area from our trip, and you were telling us about how you grew up in Atwater, and you showed us like your home and all the time, and like you don't know this, Ryan, but while you were telling the story, I was focused on the fact that there is a small Chihuahua with giant balls.
Oh.
And I was distracted by the dog the whole time.
I see.
And then you were like telling us this like really earnest story about your neighborhood and how things have changed.
I don't even remember this.
And I was just like, this is an amazing story. That dog has such giant tennis ball sized balls, and it's like a Chihuahua. I could not understand.
I'm glad I brought you to an area
Thank you.
where there's a Chihuahua with giant balls.
So I wrote a story about that, and that's what I
Nice.
performed.
Yeah, and I did like an old piece from like the early, oh my God, 2001.
I think he said these brown hands.
No, I did not. No, it was some. It was some piece, kind of like tying in, kind of like some kind of,
Did they
mixing
talk
in,
about
like,
coconuts at all?
I may have said coconuts. It was some remix of like Filipino culture with like hip hop kind of idioms.
Kulintang.
I forgot what it's called. Anyways, yeah, we did that, and then you did that piece about joy.
Oh, yeah. I wrote a piece. In the poem a day thing, I wrote about Joy Delacruz, who was a freedom writer with Jay, the person who we're going to interview next. And there was a poet, her name is Julianne Lee, or she had a thing called Not My White Savior, a series of a book that came out, and I read the poems in the book, and one of them mentioned joy, and then like in a different thing I heard joy, and then I was like, okay, so then I have to write something, so I wrote about joy, and then I said that piece. I'm getting emotional because I always do.
Are you crying?
I hate you. I don't want to get emotional.
Joe?
Why'd you ask this question about performing, Joe? Sorry, that my tears are performative. I'm fine now. But
I've never performed though.
so we gotta get Joe to perform.
No.
Oh my God! Can you read one of your Tumblr posts about how you're articulating some theory about something in Filipino American?
Those are that's what academic conferences are for.
Do you
No,
have a poster presentation about your research?
I'm in humanities, social, yeah.
Oh, so there's no poster.
No, social scientists only do posters. That should change though. I actually enjoy posters.
You need some quant in your life.
I know.
No, you don't. No, you don't. No one needs quad in their life.
All these academic boundaries, these borders, they need to be broken down.
Break them down with your brown hands.
With these brown hands. You know what's cool? I want to learn about like Philippine writing art form or performance art form like balaktasan.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard. I don't know much about this, but like I looked up like awit and corrido,
Is it awit like
karagatan. Awit is song, yeah, but I
Corrido
guess
is a song, isn't it?
karagatan. Buktong is joke.
Riddle.
Riddle.
Yeah.
So that's also kind of a writing form.
When we were in college, we took a class with Joy Barrios.
Oh,
She's
really?
like a guest lecturer, and she talked about balagtasan and how like that's very much like a Filipino cultural like experience.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. Do you know?
It's a form of debate
Yeah.
or verbal jousting. So
Yeah.
like, but it's all done in kind of poetic form.
Yeah.
So you debate about a certain issue, and then it's all in poems,
Yes.
and then there's like a judge, the hukom or
Something
like that. Yeah.
And then in like the mid 2000s, Balagtasan Collective was a collective of poets and spoken word artists who performed around LA and the country.
Mm-hmm.
That consisted of Faith Santia, John Eric Concordia, who now owns the Park Finest, Bamboo, who is a rapper who never wants to talk to us, even though we give him the opportunity to, and he's such a jerk and doesn't even come on.
Okay.
Who else is on that?
Cat Carito.
Cat Carito, Melanie Delic,
Vanessa.
Yeah. Lots of people.
Lots of our friends and people around. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to see. I've never seen a balagtasan performed here. I think I saw it once, but like
They did one. They tried. I think they tried to do it.
it's hard. I think
at
isn't it?
FPAC at
Yeah.
the festival.
I think Al Garcia tried to
Yes,
lead
he
it.
did. He totally did.
And it was really just mostly him yelling.
Anyway, so we're going to talk more about creative writing with our guest later on, Jason Magabo Perez. And he'll talk about his writing and his experiences as a Filipino American writer and educator and poet.
Hey, Mike,
Yes.
weren't you in a spoken word art thing in college?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it called?
It was the 5-Star Arts Collective.
5 stars? 5 stars, like how I can rate our podcast, This Filipino American Life, on iTunes?
Yeah. Sure.
Have you rated our podcast on iTunes yet?
I haven't. Sorry.
What? What's,
I don't even subscribe. Sorry.
what? Oh my gosh, Ryan,
Blasphemy.
have you subscribed?
I have subscribed.
Have you rated us
I
on
have
iTunes?
not rated on
Maybe you
iTunes.
should do
I
that.
will do that.
I have a 5-star Converse.
Can you rate us on iTunes too, Joe?
Yeah, of
All right,
course.
cool.
Cool. So 5 stars, like how you rate your Lyft and Uber driver, 5 stars.
Sometimes.
So you should always rate them 5 stars.
Please rate us 5 stars because the more reviews we have, the more good reviews we have, we're going to have more. It'll be easier for people to search us on iTunes.
Correct. And it's not like the only thing will come up is how to learn Tagalog.
Yeah. So far, if you Google or if you go on iTunes and search for Filipino, we are the third podcast that you find. We want to be number one.
We're number one. We're number one.
We do not want to be behind how to learn Tagalog.
Oh no.
Oh, yes. So rate us 5 stars, like Mike's 5-star Arts Collective.
Or else I'll do some spoken word next time.
Oh,
No, no.
Please, with these brown hands, do not do spoken word. But give us 5 stars.
Thank you.
And we're back.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Welcome back. Today, we have a special guest. We have Jay Magabo Perez.
Yeah.
He's going to talk more about his creative writing and his work. Jason is a writer, poet, performer, and educator.
All things I want to be.
Me too.
He is also an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Cal State University San Bernardino.
Cool.
Ooh, what is
Yeah.
their mascot over there?
Coyotes.
Go
wow.
I did not know
Coyotes.
that.
No, me neither.
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Wasn't too long of a drive.
No, not too long. It's pretty far up north. North Ridge.
Told you.
It's deep.
Not too far.
It's okay.
He brought his passport, I think. It's good.
So in the first half of the episode, we kind of talked about our creative writing practices, how we got into writing, just being creative in general. So I wanted to ask you, as an educator and as a teacher of creative writing, when did you first discover you love to write?
You know, whenever I get asked this question, I always want to lie and say I've been writing for a really long time. It's just not true. I mean, I have been writing for quite a while, but I didn't write as a kid. I enjoyed it, I think, when we were writing stories in like 3rd grade or wanting to respond to interesting assignments in high school. but I don't think I took writing seriously until I was in college. I did my undergrad over at UC San Diego. Also, I grew up for the most part in San Diego. I think, I was part of that wave of early 2000s spoken word, I guess artists, poets.
Right on. Nice.
It sounds like Mike.
Yeah. Mike and I go way back. But I was part of that wave, and I think I came to, I guess, poetry and writing and things like that, and spoken word performance because I was an organizer. And I think, some of the things that would happen at these demonstrations or these protests and things like that is that you would inevitably have these spoken word poets or artists kind of rocking the mic or the bullhorn or whatever. And it was
flashbacks right now.
That's exactly right. It was just like you read your response paper at these protests. But I started to take it seriously, and then that naturally progressed, like all PhilAm Southern California University students, to PCN, and we took that seriously. There was a really deep history of the PCN at UCSD where we were always responding to each other, whether that was people who thought there was something political that we needed to talk about at the PCN or not, right? And so there's kind of this dialectic that had been going on for years, and I kind of I was very, very involved in that way, and so. Informally, I got together with a group of folks, and I was part of a crew called the Freedom Writers. The Freedom Writers Spoken Word Collective, not the Freedom Writers with
the movie
Hillary Swank.
Her name was Erin Grin something.
True. Cal State. No, she's at Cal State Long Beach.
She's at Cal State Long Beach, but she's an alum of UC Irvine.
Is she?
I know this because as a Reach peer facilitator, I had to read the book Freedom Writers, and she was a summer. She was one of the summer SPOP. They're called SPOP, the orientation leaders.
Oh, that's
This
awesome.
is why I know.
All I remember about that movie is that she learns how to do the electric slide.
Yes.
That makes sense, and she would have learned it anyway
is this
because she
a
went to
Filipino
Irvine.
No.
Joe taught her the electric slide.
So I was part of that crew, and we would kind of teach each other to write. We'd share books and really kind of study the act, the literary act, I think. And I took some playwriting classes and things like that, but it didn't really kind of take off, and I didn't think about it seriously as something I wanted to pursue, I guess. But I wanted to study further until a little bit later, and maybe like a year or two later, and then I decided to apply for MFA programs, and then it just kind of went in that direction.
Nice.
Yeah.
So,
Wait, what was your major when you were in undergrad?
2 years, it was math. And then I took a class that was on mathematical reasoning, which was an upper division math class asking us like why certain math principles were like 1 + 1 is 2,
And then
but
you
why?
Gave it up.
And I gave it up. I was like, I gotta be elsewhere.
And then you went-
political science.
Oh,
Awful.
wow! Again, sounds like Mike.
Right? Yeah.
I was an electrical engineering major, ended up Asian American studies.
Right.
So,
Right,
and social science.
Right.
Nice.
So I did political science, and just kind of to get to the degree. I think like you folks, most likely, I was first generation college student, didn't know what I was going to do. Knew I wanted to work with youth. I knew I wanted to work in education, but I didn't know how or like in what way. And so I just kind of went through the motions of doing that major, and it just but I was still writing, I was still performing, we were still organizing around. Basically organizing literary community around San Diego, and things like that. So that kind of pushed us, or at least pushed me and another one of our members to go on and to pursue it a little bit formally, which is interesting, right? Because we were coming out of, I guess, the spoken word tradition, or this kind of moment of like the API summit and the spoken word, I guess that late 90s, early 2000s kind of era of spoken word. And there was a lot of there's a lot of suspicion of going to do an MFA, right? And so, or at least that's what I heard in close circles. You know,
wow.
you know, you can't learn to write. You can't learn to do this kind of thing.
You're getting institutionalized.
Yeah. And inevitably, yeah, I think that's actually what happens to a certain degree, and I talk a little bit about that in one of my essays in the book.
Yeah. So I wanted to know why do you think writing and poetry and are so intertwined with activism?
Yeah.
You know, you inspired. Your writing really came from a lot of your activism.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
You know, I think because I think part of what was so inspiring about the activism was the storytelling, right? And you know, I went to this. I forgot what the conference was. It was some folks who were affiliated with KMB were throwing this
Kabataan Makabayan.
Yeah, right. Kabataan Makabayan. And it was some other group that was affiliated with them. So there's one of their sister orgs in New York. And they're doing this.
Ugnayan?
I think it was Ugnayan.
Yeah.
Do you remember that conference that they had? It was like in 2001 or maybe 2002, 2003.
I do, but it's been a long time.
Right, you're probably there. And so I remember a young student who had just immigrated from the Philippines. She was in a workshop and we were talking about education, and they were asking us, you know, in the discussion, like, what's the purpose of education? And she said, I think, you know, the purpose of higher education especially is to develop a political voice. And I think poetry and spoken word and performance, and that has always kind of been a vehicle to develop some kind of voice, right? To kind of articulate whatever kind of feelings we were having or whatever kind of analysis we had of the situation. So I think it felt like a natural thing, but it also dates back, right, to so many communities. You know, the Black Arts Movement was primarily a politically motivated collective, right, or effort that and they happened to be writers, right? Even you know, some of the
Watts Prophets,
right? The Watts Prophets, all those cats, right? I think it was just natural. I don't know. I think it's one part of that voice. I think it's a part of perhaps like an alternative way of kind of connecting, an alternative way of you know, historicizing, you know, as you know, being a historian, right? An alternative way of documenting and kind of building. And I think something like spoken word or something like poetry, right, was especially, I think with the folks that I kind of came up with, especially because we were listening to a lot of hip hop and, you know, local hip hop, independent hip hop, like that was available to us, right? And it's not that we felt like we can be as good as them, but we felt that, oh, you know what? I think, you know, what they're saying is inspiring me to say what I need to say, or it's inspiring me to explore this aspect of my family or whatever.
So, growing up, who are your favorite authors? Who inspired you?
So, like I said, I didn't grow up with a lot of books in my home, and I was a really shitty English student.
wait, before that, so where did you grow up, and were your parents where did they immigrate from, etc.?
Right. So both of my parents immigrated in 1971, 1972, separately. They both found each other in Evanston, Illinois.
Oh wow!
Yeah, just through some family friends they met. My mom is she grew up Ilocano, but she's deep Tagalog from she's Batangueña, and my pops is from Puso Rubio, Pangasinan. Right, so they communicate in Ilocano actually. That's why also why I'm dark.
Elaine, are you Ilocano?
I am not. I'm Visayan, but I get asked that question a lot.
But yeah, they immigrated to Evanston And I'm the youngest. I'm the bunso of three boys. And
Hey, Ryan,
we were
are you
all
the youngest?
awesome. We were all born in Michigan, actually.
Oh, wow.
And I was born in Detroit, Michigan, on 8 Mile Road.
Wow.
Right. Well, we moved when I was young. We moved to the West Coast. My pops' family all came through his brother, who's in the Navy. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over this. My mom came as a nurse, right? And so we moved to the West Coast. We moved to Las Vegas, or actually Henderson, and then we moved to Redlands, which is, me teaching at San Bernardino is kind of a homecoming. We moved to Redlands, and then by the time I was about 10 years old, we moved to Oceanside, and that's where I spent the rest of my adolescence, like age 10 to high school, graduated high school, Oceanside, which is north of San Diego. And
Was your family in the Navy, or like was your dad in the Navy?
My dad's brother.
Oh, dad's brother. Because
my
it
dad's
sounds
brother.
like you're following like Navy towns.
Yeah. It was interesting, but neither of them. I mean, my mom was a civilian nurse at several naval hospitals.
Oh, okay.
My pops was like a janitor on the base, but
Yeah.
we were never kind of directly
Like in the military.
Right, yeah. My uncle was, my late uncle
Got
was.
it,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
then you were following your late uncle? Or they just kind of moved around in general?
we were, my dad, so the Perez side, my pops' side, all of his siblings ended up in San Diego. And so we kind of slowly made it that way. So we're kind of all over the place.
Oh, so you like moved west and then you moved south because it's like
Correct. Right. Move. Yeah, and then he was eventually stationed, right? Balboa and Camp Pendleton's right there.
Yeah, Oceanside. Yeah.
So
Interesting.
So I forgot where we were.
Oh no, it's, you grew
Your
up in
influences
Oceanside.
yeah.
And then your
My
influences.
authors, right?
Yes.
I don't know. You know what I mean? Like when I was growing up, again, I didn't read a lot. And so I thought, I do remember taking a liking to Sandra Cisneros' house on Mango Street in 9th grade. And now I think about, I haven't written about this, but eventually I'll write about it. I had this moment where my teacher, Mrs. I do remember her name, but my teacher assigned this, she gave us this assignment in 9th grade to do our own version of House on Mango Street. And now that I look back at it, I do that with my students, right? Yeah. But I didn't, I was always kind of maybe told that I didn't excel in that particular subject in English, right? That I didn't have good reading memory. I couldn't understand certain things. I didn't remember, the things that I read. And so I did that assignment very poorly. I used a lot of clip art. And then I did summaries of that. And then a homegirl of mine did the same assignment and she blew it out of the water, right? She wrote her own version, growing up like mestiza and kind of all this stuff. And I was so upset with myself about that. I think about that often. But I remember that book had an impact on me because it was stories of the barrio, and I think outside of listening to certain music, I didn't get that, right? We weren't reading that kind of stuff, right? And so that was kind of an early moment, and I think, by the time I got to college, I was thirsty for certain things, right? Thirsty for or hungry, I guess is a better term. Hungry for reading more literature that was reflective of us, right? And that didn't start with reading. Still, I was traumatized as a shitty English student. So I was listening a lot to spoken word, right? And I think the very first moment, and I'm sure Mike can relate to this 100%. The first moment, it was my friend, we were in a car, and one of my homies, his name is Rene.
Rene Gube.
Yeah, Father Bra.
We were just
Father
talking
Bra.
about him.
Yeah. I was his best man. I was one of his best men at his wedding. He was my college roommate.
Oh, so you could get him on the podcast too.
Oh, right. He was a freedom writer. I don't know if he wants anyone to know that, but
So I'm going to totally put that on the Instagram right now. And I'm going to tag Renee. Hey, look, it's your... Wait, you were his best man?
I was one of his. There's two of us. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to say that.
So we were in his Honda Accord, and I had another friend of ours, Christine, who's now she's like a vice principal somewhere in I think in Vallejo or something like that. We were in the car and he's like, "Have you heard this?" And then he threw in a CD and it was the Blue Magazine compilation, right? And do you remember this magazine? So it's like an API political magazine, and they did a CD compilation, and one of the tracks on there was "Letter to Our Unborn Children" by I Was Born with Two Tongues. And so I memorized that thing. We would play it, we'd recite parts of it at rallies and things like that, and it was really inspiring. And then Renee bought the album Broken Speak, and then we just would have that on repeat.
God.
Right? It was like passing around the gospel, right?
Sorry, I'm just laughing because like all of the early 2000s and Mike's experience is flashing before my eyes.
I'm just thinking of me wearing a scarf and a beanie right now.
And
a
the
vest in the
fact,
summertime.
okay, so I was born with two tongues. My 5th year PCN was on the same night as a show at JCCC, and I Was Born on Two Tongues was performing, and Mike chose to go to that show instead of the PCN.
Balak Tossing
that I
Collective was opening. 03 was opening for them.
And it was also their last performance.
It was
last
their last
performance?
performance ever.
What was the last performance?
I
Two
was
tongues.
born with two tongues.
As the crew,
as a crew.
So I'm sorry, Elaine. We're married now.
Mike dropped off a pineapple upside down cake to me at PCN before the show and said
says,
bye. I had to
"Bye."
go.
Right. And then he's like, "I'm going to marry you though."
And now
later.
we're married. So that worked
I went
out.
with D, whose wedding went to this past weekend.
This is
Anyway,
It's
sorry.
okay. It's PCN, dude. It's the same story.
It was my last one, Joe.
Well, you did like
That's the
4 of
most
them.
emotional one. There's
I know.
like
I did 5 of them.
Yeah, you did 5 of them.
there's like a senior suite.
I was in senior suite. I
Well, all I have to
cried.
say is just how important that whole scene was to a lot of us
Right.
in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was so important to Mike that he did not watch me perform in my last PCN ever. I'm just kidding. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyways,
I'm going
There are
to
a
sit
lot of-
back and let this play out.
there are a lot of CDs or kind of compilations that came out. I remember
Encanto, LA Encanto.
LA Encanto,
Yeah.
Infiltration.
Yep.
The Isang Mahal from
Yeah.
Seattle.
Yep.
I remember listening to those all the time. in
I
college.
have no idea what you guys are talking about. I know.
Yo,
I know.
we should teach a class on this.
what was the one from New York?
Feedback?
Feedback
No.
Crew? Was that the one that? Anyways, there's a bunch of them.
The Yellow Rage?
Yellow
They're from
Rage.
Philadelphia,
Philadelphia.
though.
Yeah.
There was like a whole there was for those who don't know, there was an entire scene.
So Mike actually went to the APIA Spoken Word Summit, the first one in Seattle. What year was that?
2001.
Okay.
That was at the somehow.
And then Mike and I both went to the second APIA Spoken Word Summit in Chicago
I was there too.
in 2003.
Wow.
Is it still happening or?
They were kept doing it for a little bit, but I don't know if it still does happen.
Yeah, I remember one happening in the Bay, like in 2008 or something or 9.
Yeah.
But
that's
it was
right.
hard to sustain
Dan
and
was
to
involved with them.
organize. You know, it's like a big.
I have a general question for all of you. Clearly, I was not really exposed to a lot of this, but in terms of what you were saying, the word sustainability of this kind of genre, is that a proper way to call a
I think so.
spoken word?
Yeah.
Like, is there a reason why it's not really as popular as it was before? Is it just like during that time, or is it,
No,
is it
good
taking
question.
a different form perhaps today?
I think open mics still happen. There's a lot of them happening. There's the Sunday Jump. There's Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Saturday something.
Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live at
Yeah, the
Chibo's.
poetry lounge is still active.
Yeah.
Yeah. But a lot of younger folks are doing it. Maybe we're just old.
I do
No.
think that spoken word had a new peak or new rise in like the mid 2000s.
Yeah,
I see. I see.
Yeah. I think I think it's about. I mean, maybe it's the decisions and the ways where folks who were kind of at the forefront of that, or maybe not even at the forefront, but who were super active in organizing that community and organizing and fostering that as a kind of, like a grassroots community, right? I mean, we went to the Chicago API Summit, and it was organized just by by folks who wanted to do it, right? Who wanted to create that space for folks. So they linked up with like, it was like a DePaul or something like that, right?
Yes.
We did like scavenger hunts around Chicago, right? So it was really this kind of organic arts kind of movement, right? And I think that, I don't know if it seems like, I think I agree, Joe. Like, I think, it seems like young folks, college folks especially, they're still finding it to be that outlet in the way that I found it, in the way that we found it to be that outlet, you know. And I'm wondering, you know, I have seen changes, and I with some of those API spoken word artists, right? One of the Two Tongues members, right, Anita Uali, who is a professor and an installation artist, right? She's up at UW Bothell, I think. Folks are kind of, you know, taking on these, I guess, or finding their work in these other kind of institutions and circles, right?
Yeah. And then there were folks who are like in Mango Tribe, who is based out of Chicago. Like they like moved on after, like like I know Miko, she's like a nurse now out in Chicago. And then Jill, who we just recently connected with like a couple weeks ago, she's a real estate agent now in Chicago. Like we all do like different things. And like Oyan Poon, who she was somebody we met in Chicago, and she at the time was like an admissions counselor at UC Davis.
Right.
And then now she has like a PhD, and she's like just recently got like a Spencer grant to study like admissions and like APIA and like racial bias in admissions at Colorado State University. So she like totally like veered left.
I think what, if anything, you know, and kind of coming back to like the topic that we started with, I mean, a lot of us found a different way to kind of take that creative energy from that era and turn it into something else. Or some of us just went off in completely different directions entirely. And so I think maybe, you know, connecting with your reflection, Ryan, like where is it now? I mean, I think some of us found a way to kind of channel that into writing, into activism still. And some of us had to find a way to pay the bills, you know? Right. I mean, I was going to make this joke earlier about how, like, well, it seems like most creative writers these days are just failed mathematicians and engineers. You know, but even me, I don't even, like, really write anymore. But, I mean, I found different ways to kind of express my kind of artistic kind of, you know.
Being a producer for an awesome podcast.
That's what I say.
Right. And I think it does go back to that those core principles, right, of community building, of consciousness raising, you know, those kinds of things. And I think, in terms of Asian Am writers, I think, you know, folks are still doing their thing, and there's a moment, and I don't know if anyone has really tracked the moment, I guess, kind of officially. Maybe people have, and I'm just not paying close enough attention. But you see some of these efforts, like the API Spoken Word Summit. I mean, that was adjacent to like the beginning of like Youth Speaks and Brave New Voices, and just at the moment. I think a lot of those folks were already involved with like the New Yorican and these other kinds of these artistic literary movements for predominantly folks of color, right, or working class folks, and so what I've seen is some of the folks that are coming out of that movement now, right, like coming out of like Brave New Voices or something like that these folks are like getting these huge grants from like NEA. They're getting, you know, like this one cat, Denez Smith, this queer black writer from, I think they're from Minnesota, was a finalist for the National Book Award last year for their book. And they come out of the tradition of spoken word, right? But they also studied literature. I think they got their MFA at University of Michigan or studied there at some point. But they pursued it. But and that performative, that training in community and kind of performance, and I guess slam also, right, really informs their poetics, right? And I think we see that, right? I see it more and more. There's a website called Button Poetry, and a lot of youngsters are kind of coming through that circle or those efforts, and then they're publishing books, right? And they're kind of establishing these more grassroots efforts now with social media that have a wide reach, right? These kind of publishing initiatives and things like that. So I think it's well and alive, but I don't know if it's the linkages are made, right? That the historical trajectory is, because we're living in the moment, right? But I think I've always wanted to kind of come back to San Diego, which is where I kind of came up, where there's a huge scene, right, of spoken word folks, and we were part of a moment where there was just like a handful of us, and we were all at the same open mics every like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. So we would like memorize each other's poems, right? And so, but now, a lot of us are like professors, right? We're in other parts of education outside of academia, right? And paying the bills, but also still committed to community in some way, right? Whether it's during our professional hours or at some other moment, right? During those off hours when we're not at our jobs, we're kind of doing stuff like this.
What I really liked about what you said earlier was just kind of finding a way to get onto your creative side, and I was kind of trying to separate the idea of performance to the writing, whether you can or cannot. But I think what sustains itself is kind of like the message and kind of like the writing that you continually do, the teaching that you do. Some folks may have gone to different things, but like what drove you to that is really activism and passion, as opposed to like writing for writing's sake.
Right.
But you had like a mission for it, which I think is great. And I also like the fact that you kind of admittedly said, growing up, I also didn't like to read very much. I mean, I read, but I just didn't. I didn't surround myself with a lot of books. I was I wanted to be a science major also. But discovering it later as something that we can learn to love, I think is actually pretty awesome. So anyway.
So we talked a lot about kind of the scene about spoken word.
Right.
How about, let's talk about your writing. What would you say like your writing style is?
Oh, related to that scene, I think, I was deeply influenced by the very same folks, right? I was born with two tongues, Eighth Wonder, Isang Mahal, BC, right? Balagtasan Collective, Kiwi in the early years, even in the later years, of course. And Faith, right? Faith Santia, right? Like these are folks who were, they were calling them like 03, right? Edrin and them, and Tracy and Kennedy, right? So, these were folks who were calling what they did literature, right? And that was super inspiring, right? And so I was trying to kind of bring those things together. And in addition to, taking like Philippine lit classes, reading like Bulosan, America's in the Heart, but I think more, even more so, I think,
his poetry and
his poetry or his novel, Cry and the Dedication, right? Like reading that stuff was really important for me. And as I kind of developed my voice, and I talk to my students about this all the time, right? Like, how do you what are the things that influence you, right? What are the cultural influences, right? What are the things you grew up with, right? And I tell them, my voice or my writing voice is really informed by, or, what I have them think of as like my swagger as a writer, if I have any. It's really informed by anything and everything that I encounter, right? So music, I think if you pick up my book plug,
you have NWA on it.
I got NWA, I got all the West Coast, right? All West Coast, Southern California, right? West Coast, LA rap. But also, I'm the biggest fan of Gilmore Girls, right? Saved by the Bell, right?
Yeah.
I've been to Saved by the Max twice.
Wow, twice. Joe, he beats you.
No.
What were you dressed up as a tiger?
No, I was not.
Joe was
Good
dressed
job.
up as a tiger.
I got to see those pictures.
Very good.
But also just, I think by the time I got my MFA, I think my first year, I finally read Gangster of Love, right? Jessica Hagedorn. And when the aunties showed up in that book, I was like, this is it. This is how we get our folks become a part of literature, right? That we can write about our folks. And so I was really inspired by her work, and I kind of read everything she wrote, like in like a month, right? And then I just kind of kept going from there and developing. So I think, it's part influenced certainly by, maybe not even that long ago, but a generation or two ahead of me of Filipino writers writing in English here in the U.S. And I think that's the case, right? So folks like Zach Lindmark or Arza Marlene Mark, right? I think that's the case because the context, the cultural context through which we're writing, right? The kind of things we could access, hip hop or other aspects of like American pop culture. Also, just kind of the educational context or academic context, right? These kinds of things really have me think about, what it is I want to write and what it is I want to, how it is, most importantly, how it is I want to say it, right? How I put sentences down, right? And I think that all comes from so many influences. I remember a homie of mine. He's a professor out at. He was also part of the Freedom Writers. He's a professor out at Antelope Valley College out in the desert. I was a big Tupac fan, right? And whoever Tupac hated, I hated also.
So you hated
right?
Biggie?
Absolutely. And then we were like, oh man, Biggie's kind of cool. I hated Nas, right? Yeah. And then my homie, his name is VJ. He said, "You don't listen to Nas?" I was like 23 years old. He's like, "If you listen to Nas, you'd become a better writer." And it actually became true, right? And I took down. This is at the time when I hopped on Amazon and bought the whole Nas discography and just studied it, right? And I haven't moved on from there. But I think it's influenced, by hip hop for sure, by growing up in my parents' household, which was both typical and atypical. I think growing up in.
Why do you say atypical?
I think maybe because I see popular representations of Filipino parents not wanting their kids to go in certain paths. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think.
Oh, your parents didn't, or are you saying like your parents didn't? Your parents wouldn't have minded that you went the creative route?
No, not at all.
They weren't like, you have to be a doctor, or you have to be.
No, I mean they thought that was going to happen, right? And I remember at one point, I think it was during the API Spoken Word Summit. I stayed with family out in Chicago, and one of my uncles like, "Oh, your dad tells me you do those political speech," right? It wasn't poetry, right? God forbid his fucking son became a poet, right? But they were supportive in the abstract, and I think there were, of course, a lot of commonalities with other Phil-Am families, but I think they're even still they're still supportive. I mean, my mom's she just left me a newspaper article and it's like, that crazy rich Asian, he gross over however many million. She said, "I want you to write that." And so they're supportive in that way, and so I think that's allowed me to kind of think about the storytelling cadences and the kinds of voices, not just content, but how my pops lands a joke, right? Or how my mom has these kind of run-on stories that are, you don't know where they begin and end, right? I think that, and then right, and they just keep going, right? And all of that it's exciting, right? Because I think what for them it's to see that reflected back to them in this thing to which they didn't feel they ever would have access to, a book, right? It's a beautiful thing to see, right? And so, that coupled with, my many degrees in different directions for some reason or another, really influence, the things I engage, how I think, and kind of how I put it down, right? And how I craft a sentence or think of a narrative or think of a narrative or a way that an essay moves or something like that, right? And I also I taught before I was a creative writing professor. I was teaching English composition for 10 years, 10 years as an adjunct, and those working with students trying to figure out encouraging them and about how to figure out what it is, how they want to say what they want to say is also inspiring to me.
So talking about that, how do you teach creative writing? I mean, do you just tell them, hey, here's a pen and paper, write something? Like, like how do you teach students who just didn't grow up reading or just didn't have an interest in writing? Like, how do you kind of inspire them to do that?
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that's a debate, especially within academia, because it wasn't always, creative writing wasn't always, it wasn't always a place of the academic institution, right? And I think especially for folks of color, right? Still we're not we're not making up all of the MFA programs, or we're not all teaching the MFA programs, right? And so it's really goes back to those core set of values around access, right? How do you access this abstract thing and demythologize that, or, I guess to make it sound sexier, decolonize that, right? For students who never thought that they could put a pen to paper or type out their story about their grandmother or type out their own story about growing up, right? Undocumented or something like that, right? So it's really kind of, I think as a teacher of creative writing, I think my sensibilities as an ethnic studies scholar, right? My PhD is in ethnic studies, right? I use a lot of what motivates that, right? Because that puts, the genesis of ethnic studies is really student driven, right? It's really about student empowerment, right? And so, how do you bring that philosophy to a creative space, right? It's not necessarily just saying, here are some conventions, learn them, and make sure you follow them, or what you're going to do fails, right? And this is not to say that I don't teach technique, that I don't teach mechanics, narrative mechanics and things like that. But ultimately, it's really inviting students to claim the languages around them, right? Inviting students to reclaim the many possibilities of what they can do with language, right? And they can't, they're not trained or educated to see that all the time in an English major. I think I'm fortunate to be with some colleagues who share that goal, right? And so, training students to be, to read, right, for both pleasure, but also to read critically and read rigorously, but also to kind of think about how what they do is actually in conversation with what these other writers are doing, right? And so I think it's, my creative writing classes, especially are I guess taught with a framework of like ethnic studies and social justice, right?
Is it lower div or upper div or grad student level? Like, what is the student population that you're hitting?
So right now I'm teaching predominantly undergrads, right? I got hired as a fiction writer. My formal training is in fiction, right? And so I teach them the short fiction, the short story, but I also teach them performance even within that, right? We also read ethnic studies like things even within that. But I'm also teaching a grad seminar right now on the field of creative writing, one of our central questions at this moment is it teachable? Is it something we can teach, right? And I think rather than having them debate around whether or not it's about talent or learning like a core set of skills, right? I think it's shifting away from that framework and saying, well, if we think of creative writing and literature as deeply affected by the politics of cultural production, right? Then we can ask other kinds of questions around access, around you felt you couldn't tell that story because there was no model for it. Why was there no model for it? How do you build that model? And again, someone might, even if you find a model and you tell that story to somebody, right, and that somebody doesn't understand you, that doesn't mean that it failed, right? That might mean that person and that reader or that readership was not your audience. You know what I'm saying, right? And I think audience is a huge, huge thing for me, and really kind of getting student and teaching students and inviting students to really think about who do you write for? Who are you showing up for when you do this thing called literature, right? If they're writing to me as the professor, I think that's wrong, right? Unless they really believe that I'm a part of their readership.
So you're trying to tell them to like write in their own voice and then to figure out like who their audience is when they're writing that?
Right. And to be able to determine that, right? And those are like the core principles, self-determination, right?
So
Autonomy.
like, what's on your syllabi? What's the reading list for one of your, like for your undergrad class and your grad seminar?
So for my undergrad class, it's a little different. I have them reading short fiction or short stories from an international anthology, right? So they could learn other kinds of structures.
Oh, so is this like a
right?
course reader that you have developed?
No.
I'm like,
I could curate. I could curate though. I could curate
Yeah.
for you.
I'm sorry, I'm just on a reading kick, so
Yeah.
I'm like asking what book recommendations.
Oh yeah,
do you have?
absolutely. But yeah, I put together a reading list that is partly, you read some short stories, but I'm very attentive to the fact that at Cal State San Bernardino, we're about 80% first generation college students, right? We're in HSI, right? We're also in San Bernardino in the IE.
And HSI
right?
stands for what?
Hispanic Serving Institution. And so, being very, very mindful of who my audience is as a teacher, right? And kind of how they might see themselves reflected in the literature, and then perhaps be inspired by to tell their story, right? So one story that I always teach lately, that I've been teaching a lot lately, is this really, really short story called The Moths. And it's by this Chicana writer by the name of Elena Maria Viramontes. And she wrote a short story collection titled The Moths and Other Stories. And she writes about and within and for, and is always committed to East LA, right? And so that resonates a lot with my students. And so teaching that first, right? And saying, look at what she's doing with language. How is she describing these things, right? What are some of the things you see in your neighborhood, on your block, right? What are some of the idiosyncrasies of your abuelita, or what are some of the quirks of your cousin or whatever, and really getting them to pay attention to those kinds of details. I think that's how they access their voice or the world that they want, even if they're writing like science fiction or fantasy and or writing in the genres, right? Just being like trying to kind of develop a consciousness or invite them to develop a habit or a way of kind of inhabiting the world and kind of paying attention to details and the nuances of the things that are right in front of them, right?
That they don't pay attention to usually, yeah.
Right. And I certainly did not, right?
Yeah,
I think, I wrote a lot of cliche things, right? There was not one clear image in some of my spoken word pieces, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? But I think the writing becomes much more powerful, or at least much more relatable, right? You're painting a world and you're kind of allowing, you're engaging you're engaging your reader, or the listener, or the audience in a lot of dimensions, right? Like the five senses, or right.
Do you have a specific or a favorite activity you like to do with your students? Do you make them all like stand on top of their desk and like say, "Oh, Captain"?
I want to do that. I really want to do that.
But you're not at a boarding school, so
Right. I like to, during my I like to engage in performance, right? But I also like to think about things through like cinematically, I guess, through film. And so something that I like to do for them is to kind of have them write something, let's say about a character or write like a situation. And then I like them to kind of act it out, right? And stage it, and then stop and let them go and kind of explore it, and then stop and then comment on things and say, you see how we're kind of visualizing this? This is the kind of experience that we're trying to create for our reader, right? It's very kind of, I guess, like Augusto Ball's like theater of the oppressed kind of strategy, right? Embodying like embodying the literature, right? And I think that's why my background in performance is or my passion for performance is always kind of informing the classroom. So I do have them do things that they would not expect in a creative writing classroom, right?
They're like, I didn't sign up for this performance part.
For sure. And they're like, I don't relate to all of these stories, right?
Quietly in the back.
Right.
So I do have to ask you this.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this question too.
You once gave a P-grad commencement speech that referenced Zach Morris from Saved by the Bell.
Zach Morris?
Can you please elaborate on that speech and what connects Zach Morris to a bunch of Filipino college graduates.
Okay, so first, I do recognize that Zach Morris is a horrible human being.
There's a series on YouTube,
Right?
called Zach
Yeah,
Morris
I heard
is
about
Trash.
this. And so I
Zach
thought-
Morris is trash.
That's what it is. Zach Morris is trash. I'm not really on social media, but I saw that and I was like, oh man, this is gonna go to pieces. My piece goes to pieces. So I was invited to give a P-grad speech, right? Filipino graduation at UCSD, which is my double alma mater. And I don't know. I think it was such a cultural influence. And I was speaking to like college students who probably only were able to watch it on rerun, right?
If that.
Or
If
God
that.
forbid the new class.
Right. Oh gosh. Whew, right. I thought you were gonna say the college years.
No,
the
those
college
were
years is a shit.
I like the college years. College was good.
Yo, Slater was Chicano, man. Chicano
He
studies.
fought for
For that one episode, he was.
Chicano studies.
All right. We digress. Carry on.
You know, I don't. Maybe because he's like half Malaysian. No, I'm just kidding.
Indonesian.
Oh, sorry. I'm totally.
Totally. We got all like Indonesian.
Oh, sorry. It was kind of a fun in to choose that and kind of relate to the students. I think one of the things that we can reflect on in our educational experiences is the media that we are watching, right? And so whether or not the myth held up when we got to school, right, in high school, and whether things were like 90210 or whatever it was we were watching, right, like Saved by the Bell, I think I'm kind of just thinking out loud here. I think like first generation students were looking for models, right? For how to be in these educational contexts. And I think, he wasn't doing that well, right? He was messing up. But he had a core support, and I think I gravitated towards his story mostly because like that's the graduation kind of speech that I remember. But I remember when I think I write about this in the speech when when Mr. Belding says, "You've got something very special in you, son. I can't wait to see when you let it all out," right? And it was a very emotional moment, right? But also it was my, I think I had some homies in the audience when some older homies who had graduated with me. Cause this is 8 years after I delivered that, like 7 to 8 years after I graduated college. And I had some homies there with me and I wanted to affirm my place as the leading scholar of Saved by the Bell. At least in that context.
Oh my God, he's beating you, Joe.
Oh, no.
I don't know. Ryan's pretty good too.
Oh
so.
man, I've never given a speech referencing Saved by the Bell.
So one episode is going to be Ryan
Just saying.
delivering a speech about Saved by the Bell.
So basically, Zach Morris is inspiration that you should aspire to.
But I mean, he was Native American.
No, he wasn't. That is such
Running Zach.
wrong.
I just sent Joe
Running
a picture
Zach.
of that.
Running Zach.
That's so wrong. He's like straight up like Coachella, like appropriation level wrong.
From where the
From the
sun
Nez
now
Perce.
stands.
Oh my
Nez
goodness.
Perce tribe.
What?
Yeah. Chief Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, who took a weaving class at UCLA?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Come on, man.
Mike doesn't know anything because he didn't watch that. He didn't watch it.
Oh, man.
So we're almost out of time, and I know we could talk for hours, but I do also want to kind of touch upon the history of your mom.
Yeah.
And kind of the importance that she has in kind of Filipino American history. Can you kind of talk about her story and what she faced?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, my mom immigrated to Evanston, Illinois. I don't know. I don't know for sure if it was under the exchange visitors program, right? That was initiated by the Marcos regime to bring Filipino nurses to the U.S., right? And so it was
It
kind
was
of
a Cold War. It was a Cold War program.
Oh, it's a Cold War program.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if she came under that direct program. But a lot of what Kathy Choi taught, I know you had Kathy Choi on here like last year or something. A lot of what she talks about in terms of like the many circuits of migration that happened through those kinds of programs. That's the era within which my mom came. And so she came. She was working for a veterans hospital in Illinois, and then she moved up to the Ann Arbor Veterans Hospital. So the story is in 1975, a wave of breathing arrests with these veteran patients at the Ann Arbor Veterans Administration Hospital were kind of coming up, right? Some folks estimate like 35 to 50 patients were experiencing breathing arrests, and some of them were dying. Some of them were able to survive. The FBI came in, so they couldn't figure out what was going on. It was this kind of mysterious thing. The FBI came in 1975 and launched, I think it was about a $1 million investigation. And they were in the hospital. They set up shop in the hospital, were questioning nurses, doctors, staff. My mom said that they were like harassing her and the other nurse who was implicated in the case, who became her friend through this. And they eventually ended up pinning it on my mom, right? And another nurse. Her name was Filipina Narciso. And they indicted them. And then they that was in June 16th, 1976 is when they got arrested. And then they were put on trial. I think my mom was pregnant with our middle brother, and then so they had to kind of wait that out, and then they went through the trial in early 1977, and then it went till summer 1977. And so during that time, there's a lot of advocacy around the country, but also in the Philippines, with Philippine nurses being very, very popular, popular form of migration for folks in the Philippines. And they went through the trial, and they were, at least kind of, Kathy Choi's study is brilliant because what it shows is the ways in which the FBI or the federal government constructing the case was actually very informed by a lot of the historical context, a lot of stuff that was going on, right? The backlash of civil rights movement, right? Backlash against Black Power movement, right, and stuff like that. All the kind of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover stuff, but also the context of the war in Vietnam, right? All of that stuff informing the ways in which my mom's and this other nurse were being represented in the media, and how they were going after them ultimately, and constructing and fabricating this case against them, right? The popular opinion, I think you could say, at least from what I've seen, folks in the community, but also folks in the Filipino community, but also folks who are allied and kind of helping out, who are non-Filipino, kind of thought it was going to work in their favor. They thought, so there was so much public pressure, there were a lot of support for them. They knew this was clear scapegoating, right? Even so, the verdict came out guilty, right? And so they were found guilty of poisoning, conspiracy, which is a federal offense, right? Poisoning, conspiracy, and I think one count of murder. Right. And there were way more counts before that. Right. But they dropped all these counts because during the trial, the case seemed shadier and shadier. Right. They were hypnotizing witnesses and all these really kind of things that didn't add up on the federal government case side, on the prosecution side. They were found guilty. My mom and the other nurse were sent to West Virginia, the federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia, for a couple months. And during that time, her lawyers were fighting for an appeal. They were eventually granted an appeal later that fall, and then by that time, the federal government decided to drop their case. They're like, no, we're not going to pursue this again, because they threw a lot of money at this case. At that time, $1 million is a lot of money to make this happen and to find them guilty, right? And they were released, and the verdict wasn't necessarily overturned, from my understanding, but the case just never opened up again. They never kind of solved it. They never wanted to solve it, I guess. The federal government never knew to solve it. I mean, to me, that just shows that the thinness of their case, right? That was clearly fabricated. And so I spent a lifetime studying it and trying to kind of figure out what is the appropriate voice and who's the appropriate audience. What am I doing this for? For whom am I doing it, right? Like, and it's led to a lot of different kinds of projects, right? A lot of different ways to explore it, for better or worse, you know. So
did your mom tell you about this?
A little bit. So my dissertation was actually not about my mom's story. It was about how I haven't been able to complete a novel about my mom's story for like 10 years, right? And so it was really about, again, the ethics of research, right? And kind of thinking, what's the right method, right? How do we do this ethically and responsibly for the community, right? But I talk about it in my dissertation, this moment when we were living in Henderson. I must have been like 3 years old, maybe 4 years old. And my pops brought out like this, I think it was like a 60 millimeter projector, right? Right. And they were projecting on the wall onto like a bed sheet, right? That was thumbtacked to the wall, this footage of these protests, and they're talking in Ilocano, right? And my brothers kind of knew, like my oldest brother is 40, how old is he? He's 45, right? So he was young, he was little, but he remembers everything, right? And so they're talking about what had happened. And I remember that moment, but I didn't know how to ask about it. And then there would be little moments throughout my life where my mom would be like, you know, I think she would subtly kind of, you know, raise me to have like a healthy distance and suspicion of U.S. institutions, right? And so I didn't start asking her until that moment where, maybe this is a great full circle, I know we're ending here, that moment where I got into spoken word. I was finding my voice. We were organizing for janitors like my pops, and I was learning about all these injustices. And then I came home one day and I was like, Mom, Dad, like this is wrong. This stuff that we're studying, it like we're finding out that we still need to. This is a fight that needs to continue, right? And I wasn't even talking about what happened with my mom because I didn't know specifically. And then they just smiled at me. They're like, like, you're ready. And then they give me this blue bin of like her personal archives, like newspaper clippings, court reports, anything, her journal from when she was in jail, right? Wow. All of these things. And I've been kind of working with that and avoiding it for, over 15 years now. But it's that moment when I was in college and actively performing and studying and organizing and things like that, it kind of opened me up to be able to at least start to ask about it. And since then, I've interviewed my mom and which are also part of the book, and just kind of been able to explore it further, mostly to document it for our community, right? Yeah. For for our family.
How you want to release it? I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but would you ever want to do a documentary? Do you want to finish that novel that you're talking about?
So many things. I don't know what the right thing is. I've had a lot of ideas, right? I wanted to do a novel, and then I couldn't get myself to get there. I've made some experimental films. Part of my PhD was training with a filmmaker, like documentary films. I put a good part of the transcripts that I've had with conversations with my mom in the book, in my first book. So it might come out in pieces, right? In doses. I think a documentary would be dope. I think, I don't know what that, I don't know that I would want it to be a traditional documentary though, right? I think, I'm inspired a lot by like third cinema folks or, feminists of color filmmakers who are really kind of challenging different avenues of storytelling and things like that. So, I think, the next stage will be maybe, I think I'm just going to try to get out some of my performance work around that in a book form, maybe that does multimedia. I'm not sure. I think I'm still on I guess I'm still waiting, right, to see what the right form or forms are, right? So
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Time is up. Did you want to plug your book real quick?
Yes. So my book came out last year. It is
Perfect timing, right, for this interview?
is an assemblage of poetry and prose, talking about all growing up in Southern California and my mom's history and talking about my eczema, all kinds of things in there. It's called This Is for the Mostless. It's published by a small publisher called WordTech Editions. It's available on order through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstore, any indie bookstore, you can have them order it. Yeah, and I love talking with folks about it if they care to read it. And so I'm super grateful that you all invited me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Where can people reach you?
You can reach me on my website, www.jasonmagaboperez.com. My email's on there. Yeah, I have a few things coming up.
You don't do the Instagram, Twitter, all
I do.
that
I'm
anymore?
also on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter.
Jason Magabo Perez without the vowels. JSNMGBPRZ is my handle. I'm not super
Because it's
active.
2018 and that's how we work. No.
Right. I'm not super active. It's mostly to see what other people are saying about the
Yes, to lurk. That is how I use Twitter as
Right.
well.
It's just so that me and Joe can like each other's Lakers posts.
Yeah.
And this
Now it's
interview
over.
is
Ryan is done.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for coming here.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you. This Filipino American Life is produced by Michael Nailat. Our intro and outro music is by Roger Habon, aka 10.4 Raj. Resident reality checker Girly Colado, legal advisor Rianne Fajardo, and graphic design by Vincent Collyer.